Welcome to Product AMA, your daily online Ask Me Anything. We started Product AMA to give those passionate or curious about product management a daily break, something to look forward to.
We are talking about driving success for B2c products with Scott Affleck, who is the VP of Product at Ratehub. Scott started off his career in strategy consulting, but transitioned into product in 2009. Before joining Ratehub in 2017, Scott worked in product in a variety of B2c businesses, including eBay and several fintech, travel, and social media startups. We are so excited to have you on Product AMA, Scott. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us one interesting unknown fact about yourself?
Thanks so much, Rhythm, for the introduction and for having me here. I just wanted to start things off by saying a big thank you to Lee, Mark, and yourself for hosting these events. I think the Toronto tech ecosystem has been growing incredibly well the last few years. And it's, I think, in part due to events like this and organizations like this that really help drive growth and acceleration of the product community. I saw it in my time in San Francisco and London, and it's great to see it all happening here. So thanks a lot for that. A lot of product is, in my opinion, apprenticeship and experiential, both things you do yourself and things you learn from each other. And so I think with the current situation, we need to keep that emphasis going, especially since the community is been impacted in lots of challenging ways. And so it's great for all of you. Thanks so much for all of you putting the time into this, and I'm sure the rest of the community thanks you as well. Let me explain a little bit about my background. Rhythm gave me a good overview, but I'm a tech guy. I have been, for as long as I can remember, studied computer engineering, tried to choose between business and engineering back in the day, and so took an engineering degree because I figured this way I get to do either when I get grown up and get to decide what I want to do with my future. So even from from undergraduate, I went right into strategy consulting. I worked for several years in the Bay Area specifically to be on the tech scene. And it's just something that kind of resonates in my blood. So I joined Ratehub in 2017. For those of you who are not familiar with it, Ratehub is a financial product comparison site. We help consumers find the best mortgages, credit cards, insurance products, etc., for their personal financial situation. And we're probably one of those services that you would categorize as known but not known. We get 1 million people a month from, a lot of it is SEO, and a lot of people may not necessarily recognize our brand, but we're helping millions of people every year solve their financial challenges. Since I've joined, we've more than doubled our headcounts. I set up the product and design and analytics functions there. And you know, it's been a fun journey to kind of help establish a whole set of new functions and help Canadians make better financial decisions. How about a fun fact? Okay, so I actually had two. One's a little bit less unique, I guess. I'm a big traveler. I've been to 75 plus countries and hope to get to over 100. Right now, I think between pandemic and a 6-week-old child, I might be delayed for a little bit of time, but I will plan to get to over 100 in my lifetime. You need to have goals in life. And then I guess the other one that's kind of funny is I've been in several startups. Every single one of them has been bought out, but I've lost money in the situation as opposed to gaining relative to other people, which is a funny unknown fact. Unfortunately, sometimes options don't pay out, but that's what it is. So that's a little bit of an intro about me. Rhythm, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. And I think we have that common goal of visiting 100 plus countries by the end of this, the great life we have. And yeah, like Corona has definitely impacted the travel industry. Moving on, I think we start off the MA. I want to know, I was curious about this, that you spent all your career, all your product career working on B2C companies in Toronto, a city which is more known for B2b startups companies. So what is this appeal between B2C and B2b?
Yeah, so I think I just love, you probably hear this a lot from consumer products, PMs, but I just love building things that people use and that drive value for people's lives. There's just a pure tangibility here that I understand what people need because it's relevant to me too. I mean, I don't understand every user's needs, but I can empathize a lot more closely with the consumer needs than a business need. So one aspect of it is I just enjoy that realm and that world so much so that I've like rarely even applied for a B2B job in my career. The other aspect of it is the approach that you take on B2C versus B2B is quite significantly different. And I'm much more of a fan of break stuff and fix it if it works. And which doesn't work so well in a B2B context when you have major clients that you have to keep a sustainable platform in place and maintainable platform in place. And I'm also a massive believer in analytics and very analytically driven person. And so those two, the way you gather your information just tends to be quite significantly different, and it's much more up my alley.
All right. And you touched upon a bit about the approach in B2C. So comparing different PMs, how is a B2c Pm different from a B2b Pm? Are there any differences in their skill set and their day-to-day, as well as the approach they take towards the product development process?
Yeah, so I alluded to a little bit of this, and you know, admittedly, look, I've not worked in enough B2B spaces myself to necessarily have tons of experience on that side. But when you work in eBay, I was working on the seller side of things where we were selling into small businesses, and I've worked in several contexts like that, plus interviewed and met a whole lot of people over time that are coming from a B2B context. So let me share some observations that I have, if not necessarily pure truths. So I think there is a ton of overlap, and there's places where both have greater strengths, I think, but there are some differences. So in general, like if you think about pure Scrum team management, project delivery, all that kind of stuff, I don't think it necessarily changes a whole lot. So if you're operating a Scrum team, you know, writing the tickets, working with the team to do all that stuff, not a huge amount of change. I actually think B2b PMs that I've interviewed in the past are probably better at one aspect, which is communications and project stakeholder management, because traditionally you have a lot more go-to-market training. You have a lot more thinking about how you keep everyone informed and so on. And so I've seen a lot of real strengths on that side. Where I see differences on the B2C side and strengths on B2c PMs that are kind of different tends to be more around the use of analytics, UX, and kind of qualitative understanding. And then also a very important thing in the consumer world is understanding acquisition methods that are slightly different. So SEO, even just things that you need to do for paid acquisition are quite significantly different than when if you have a sales team go out and bring someone on board, and then like you're much more focused on retention. And so again, that doesn't mean you're not doing any of those in both sides of the fence. I think there's just a bias in terms of skill sets for those two pieces. But those are the areas I see the most differences.
All right. And talking about product success, Scott, how do you define a successful product? How do you measure the success of that product? And, you know, could you please share some examples from your own experience?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to give you a cliched answer, but honestly, I think that the successful products are actually those products that drive value in people's lives. And it's not just a growth in numbers thing. So I'll give you an example of a place where we did not drive value for customers at Ratehub that was a great learning, but showed growth in numbers. So we had run this one test, and this is a test I put together a couple of years ago, where we were adapting CTA copy to try and get people to apply for more credit cards. And so on the numbers perspective, we saw a lot more engagement on that front. A lot more people clicked through and went to applications for our partners and so on. But it actually hit us on the back end. And so people who were seeing those forums tended to drop out and not get approved or not get even complete an application. And so while it may have looked like we were helping our customers because the numbers were increasing and there was a much higher level of engagement, we were causing negative value for everybody in the ecosystem The consumers weren't getting the products they wanted. Banks are spending additional time and cost on, trying to get people who applied for a card through the funnel. And like, we weren't making money because we were ticking everybody off, right? And so just choosing raw conversion numbers can be a real bad metric to look at times, or you need the right conversion metrics in place. I would say in general, how to measure the success of the product, it varies a lot. I mean, what I would say is you got to find your right North Star metric. There's lots of very different applications and metrics that you might use. So if you're in B2b, it might be something more around engagement. Or if you're in a social media platform, it's much more of an engagement-driven metric because you're all about getting people to come back in a short period of time and repeat certain actions and things like that. Products like travel and Ratehub, where you have much more long-term acquisition basis. People don't buy like holidays every week, and people don't buy credit cards every week, right? It's hard to look at an engagement metric in sort of the same way for retention. So I think it varies a lot by product and worldview, but ultimately I think you just find the things that are most accurately tied to consumer value in your circumstance, and then use that as your key success metric.
Awesome. And as a reminder to our guests in the audience who have just joined in, we are chatting with Scott Affleck, who's the VP of Product at Ratehub. Feel free to ask your questions in the Zoom chat. I already see one question by Herman in the chat, and it's about your time in London. So in keeping with your love for travel, you've also spent a couple of years in London, which he believes is hands down the best city in the world. Were there any interesting differences in the way tech ecosystem operates in London as compared to Toronto? Any learnings that we could internalize?
Yeah, great question. I kind of alluded to it before. So I spent about two and a half years working in London in the tech ecosystem there. And it's really interesting. I actually think the approach isn't necessarily different. It's just at different phases of maturity, I would say. So before we jumped on this call, I was talking a little bit with Lee about how product has changed, and Mark as well. But there's been a change in maturing across product in general. In how life is, 2009, I was saying I didn't actually operate in an agile environment. It was a very waterfall kind of approach to things. London was a bit more further ahead. Everyone was operating much more in an agile way. So there was an aspect of that, but then there was also an aspect of the maturity of the network, as I said before. And so, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, I think we're maturing in Toronto. We're catching up to that aspect, but the biggest benefits I saw there were all these kind of conversations and meetups that would happen that lead to networking, where people would go have a pint or coffees and learn how to solve problems that are analogous in their respective space, even though they're not working as competitive businesses or even in the same industry. There's a lot of analogy that you can drive across verticals. And so the more you can immerse yourself in those types of people, the more you can learn different approaches without actually being competitive. And so I think that was the biggest difference I saw, was just a little bit more maturity on the network and people talking to each other regularly about the problems that they face. I think in Toronto, we have a lot of these meetups, but we haven't necessarily turned it to that next level of solving problems as a collective, or small subsets of the collective yet. So that's one thing that I see is we're a little bit lacking on still.
Okay, all right. And let's move on to innovation and growth in the product space. Is product success synonymous to product growth? And how do you approach building successful products? And talking about innovation, how do you approach innovation? Do you have any interesting examples to share with us?
Yeah, sure. So So as I said before, I fundamentally believe consumer value is the most important piece for measuring the success. And so effectively by saying that successful products are intrinsically linked, right? If you're building a product that's valuable to a consumer, it creates a flywheel of referral and acquisition and so on. And so, yeah, I think they are pretty intrinsically linked. If I think about what you need to get there, really, it's again a bit cliche, but really understanding explicitly the customer and the person that you're trying to service and what their basic needs are, more than the demographics, is the key. And so if you want to drive a killer feature, it's not about knowing, you know, their wealth bracket, or it's about understanding what does a segment of customer look like, what are the things that they face as challenges every day. This is true in B2b and every other place too. One of the more accurate examples of this, I think, in terms of a killer feature that I've always really loved, was from Ritual on the piggybacking experience. And, you know, I think I've always had some admiration for Ritual and their approach to tackling all these problems, because if there's anyone on the call from Ritual, congrats, well done. But I think I had a huge admiration for years for the way that some of these things are tackled. So let's take the piggybacking example and talk about it for a second. So if you think about it, the business wants higher acquisition and retention. And on the flip side, consumers all don't want to wait in line. And one way to share that value is by picking up for other people. But it's not necessarily an obvious thing. There's lots of solutions to that problem. You could actually send out promotions like everyone else does, and like tell everyone to order their own food on Ritual. That's one solution to that problem, right? That's one way it could work. Another way, like there's lots of other ways it could work. But what they identified was lunch is also a social thing, right? We like having our lunches with other people. Most likely we want a lot of people walk together for lunches, and then they come back together and they sit and eat together. And so that's not something you get from any demographic data. It's not something you get for anything except for intrinsically knowing the customer experience. And so now, and the benefits extended to the whole neighborhood. So everybody wins, right? And that's how I think you get to these real killer features. Approach to building successful products. Like, look, I think the other thing they do quite well is a very standard sort of scientific practice of looking for an opportunity, finding ways to hack your way to success as quickly as possible and as lightweight as possible. And then if you need to goose that thing with some extra acquisition or loyalty points or whatever else to get usage so you can get a more accurate read fast, but they did that through giving extra loyalty points to people. And you need that to measure whether or not something is working at scale. It's critical for a B2C business very quickly. And then I think, and we've obviously done similar things with, like, we've used external tools to hack together appointment bookings for our agents working with customers on mortgages and so on. What is the best way you can quickly get a large number of people to try out your solution with the lowest cost possible? And then I think the last thing I would say is just don't dwell, right? Like, don't get wed to your solution. If it's not working, throw it away and either decide to leave that altogether or as quickly as possible, or take another approach. And there's lots of signals you can get to tell you that.
Yeah. And like, talking about piggybacking, I once met the head of product at Ritual, and he confidently and very proudly mentioned that this was the best innovation of his life across all the companies he's worked for.
It's a killer feature.
It is. And you touched a lot upon, users and different behaviors. So B2C products reach out to a large set of users, and now these users might have different needs, behaviors, demographics, and so on. And in this case, how do PMs do user research effectively to understand and cover the needs and problems of the various types of users out there, and not get trapped into the state of analysis paralysis?
Yeah. So, we at Ratehub, for instance, we have a pairing generally of a UX person / researcher that's working with PM. And so we kind of blend the two at times. It's a lot of tag teaming on some of these pieces for sure. The key to finding those answers is to find those people in the right context. And so you can do that through a variety of techniques. First thing that's very important is knowing exactly who you're trying to talk to. Again, not just demographics, but like, is it people that are looking to go for lunch together? So that's pretty important. And then thinking about screening against those criteria in a variety of ways. You can do that through sort of like asking the consumers themselves what world they're in right now. So for instance, when we're looking for people to talk to us about their experience finding low interest credit cards, we're not going to send them questions about points cards because they're generally probably worried about their credit score imbalance and what they can be approved for. Understanding that, having that customer knowledge will help you screen up front. The other thing that's super helpful is validating once you've kind of got some screening going. So like asking people the same questions a variety of times just to make sure that you haven't got some false positives or misinterpretations on those questions. So usually you can ask in any sort of screeners or as well in prototype and research. Say you want to test a feature, ask the same question 3 different ways if it's the only question you need to solve for. And if they give you a similar sort of answer, you'll find you're getting to a solution quickly. To avoid kind of the analysis paralysis piece, I totally believe in time boxing a bunch of stuff. Time boxing or user count boxing on this stuff. Like, it's amazing how often you can get an answer on a series of questions with like 6 to 8 conversations to people. Might not be perfect, but like you trying to talk to everyone doesn't make sense. That's what A/B testing is for. And so ultimately what you're trying to figure out on the qualitative side is why do people act this way and what is driving their interests? And then you figure out if it's scalable by testing at large in population, because guess what? Even if you find out that social lunch experiences are valuable to those 6 to 8 people, if the people on your app are not enjoying social lunches, there's no point implementing that feature. So you need to pair the two quite closely together.
All right. And we have another question here. What are some of the hallmarks of a team that executes flawlessly and excels in product delivery?
Whew. Good question. You know what? I think just pure satisfaction is often a pretty good indication of this. Just like we think about customer satisfaction, at Ratehub, we actually measure team satisfaction. And so with every sprint retrospective, we ask people for a rating and we say, hey, how did this go? And rate us out of 10. And we do look at those trends up or down. And the PMs talk to us if we see that the team is not just seems to be off, but actually openly off, right? Like they're saying explicitly, we're not doing as well as we could. I think generally, if you have a motivated team, people solve the challenges that they're trying to solve. And the delivery just kind of happens. So that's one aspect of it, is internal to the team, making sure that everyone there is happy and motivated, feels like they're solving the right things. And then you have to also kind of look at that from the broader business perspective as well, and gather the feedback on, like, are we hitting our timelines? And, you know, we have not yet implemented this necessarily, but I've seen other businesses track delivery versus target gauges, target date gauges, not to be hypercritical, but just to identify trends and differences of performance within the teams on those things. So if you can wrap up team satisfaction and delivery to the rest of the business, you generally know you're doing the right things.
Awesome. And Scott, earlier you touched a little bit upon A/B testing and like testing and validation. So what are your favorite tools that you have used during your career to build successful products?
Yeah, I've used a lot over time. So let me tackle, I've got a couple of categories of things that are critical. So for the pure A/B testing standpoint, I mean, if you're in a consumer product and you don't have the ability to do some basic front end optimization that doesn't require dev work, it's like in an ideal world without dev work, you're missing an opportunity, I think, in a lot of cases. So in the past, I've used tools like Visual Website Optimizer and Optimizely to literally do some basic CSS and scripting changes to the site to see if we could change things like CTAs, colors, blah, blah, blah. Super valuable, helpful tools. You can use your own frameworks for that, obviously, as well. That's one. I said before, analytics is like linchpin in my decision-making process, at least. And by far and away, for those of you in the Toronto Slack portal, you can see I'm a pretty big believer in Heap. It's by far, in my experience, the best tool I've ever used for analytics, purely because you can actually get answers to questions that you didn't have thinking in place for before you launched a test. Simply put, if you miss tagging things up in a lot of other platforms, you lose all the past data history, versus now I can launch an A/B test on the moment and without dev support, find out whether or not people click the button. So and then the powerful UI interface as well. As I'm a big believer. I haven't used Amplitude, heard good things, but I've pretty much tried everything else. Usertesting.com for qualitative, hard to beat if you can afford to spend on it. All you can eat packages for testing as much as you want, like brilliant, and not having to source users in quite the same way. And then more pure, there's some really little ones. We use Miro for ideation and whiteboarding and flows and stuff. Very helpful, handy tool to work with. Kenny, I don't know if you're on this call, but introduced us to Instagant for word planning and road mapping. It's a very simple, basic resource planning tool, which is free and useful for like a very simple resource planning piece. And then I guess from the SEO standpoint, which is also probably novel for a lot of people, like there's plenty of sites out there like moz.com, Google's blogs are great. And even in Chrome, they have Lighthouse extensions for tracking your performance against SEO best practices, accessibility, and a bunch of other things. Simple little tools like that really help us accelerate to answers on all those fronts.
Awesome. Yeah, and about Miro, like I've been hearing so much about it, especially like now most of the teams are remote, sorry, and they need to collaborate. So like all the whiteboarding is being done on Miro.
Yeah, it's great.
That's great. Yeah. All right. So we are at the halfway mark right now, and please feel free to ask your questions to Scott in the Zoom chat. Scott, what are some of the best resources like blogs and books that you would recommend to learn about building great products?
Yeah, I tend to be by nature more of a learn by doing person and by analogy. So rather than a pure book learning kind of person. So I try to apply analogs more than I do spend my time reading books all the time, to be honest. But what I will say is, even if you like the bite-sized kind of approach to getting suggestions and ideas, which I love these kind of quick suggestions on things. I follow a ton of all the analytics tools, A/B testing tools, like email testing tools, SEO newsletter tools, and just literally sign up for email subscriptions on this stuff and then just invest the time in reading. So it's amazing what you can get your hands on just by giving someone your email address, which you could then filter away if you don't care. Or unsubscribe. But what I found is I've gotten a lot of kind of learnings from those things about the things that are going on in the world, and let other people do the work of curating the reading for me, in a sense. The other piece, I think, is the community. And so I've talked about this several times. Learning from other PMs has been critical in my career, and just not just in the business, but talking to other people about that stuff. just opening a dialogue through coffee and so on really helps with a lot of these pieces. And then I guess the last thing is, I tend to really enjoy, I just tend to criticize everything I'm looking at. And so I apply those things that I've seen and read in bite-sized chunks and constantly criticize every site that I'm looking at, not in a negative way, why do they do things this way? And what could I do differently to try to solve that problem? It's something, probably the best piece of advice I got from a mentor in my first job, which was apply a critical eye to every experience, even in your personal life, just to see if you can figure out ways to improve. And I think that's actually driven a lot of my learnings as well. It's like, here's what do I think the problem is here that they're trying to solve, and how could they do it differently?
Great. And what do you think are some of the unique challenges that B2c PMs face while in their day-to-day routine as a product manager?
Challenges for B2C versus B2B?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you flirt with the edge of the disaster, you sometimes get burned, right? And so if you want to live in a world where you experiment aggressively, sometimes things go wrong and things break, and we haven't built things at a way that's 100% approved and secured before, or stable before we go live on things. Sometimes you get fires that come out of that a lot that need to be dealt with rather quickly, or you need to pull back and pause what you're doing. So I think that's one of the pieces. And again, I think you kind of alluded to this a bit before, but because you're dealing with literally millions of people who have different opinions and stuff on everything, you can kind of miss the mark sometimes faster because you don't have 10 clients or 10 most important clients to focus to get it right for. Having 10 different clients that have opposing viewpoints is a whole different thing in a B2B context, and I don't envy people that have to solve the challenges for 10 customers all saying opposite things. But it's I think a lot easier to miss the mark on your qualitative research and find out in quantitative that you've just done the wrong thing. So there is some stuff that you throw back to the drawing board there. I guess the other piece that's a blessing and a curse is, in a world where we're defining consumer products that every one of us uses in our daily lives, everyone in the room has their opinion about how something should be built according to their own value. And again, not having worked in a B2B context in the same way, I would assume this happens there too, but I think it's a little different than if you have everyone in the room buying off the same site that's your product and not using it for supporting your business.
For sure. And we have very interesting questions about users here. So Lee is asking that we usually approach product opportunities by looking for an undeserved need or a pain point, etc. But an argument that often comes up, especially in the B2C space, is that consumers aren't always aware of what they might want. For example, iPads with iTunes.
Yeah.
The two approaches aren't mutually exclusive. But what thoughts do you have about the balance, or when to aim for something totally new?
Yeah, it is a tough question. Never trust people for what they say. Don't take them for their face value. So pretty easy to miss the mark on that stuff for sure. It's pretty easy also to forget about even having a wrong solution, but a mediocre solution can happen by following those pieces. And, I think if I go back to my piggybacking illusion, I think when Ritual, I don't know, but when the Ritual team asked users about this kind of stuff, I suspect they just heard that people like to have lunch at the same time and could have suggested a very different approach, as I mentioned earlier. Ultimately, I think there's always a blend of kind of judgment and feedback on things that you have to go to. One approach is to start with kind of an MVP approach to things, and then try to extrapolate from there piece by piece and say, hey, we're going to start by encouraging people to buy lunch at the same time. And then we're going to see if we can introduce some batching and like get people to give referees to like codes to buy lunch at the same time. And then move it a little bit into batching those orders on the back end, and sort of slowly build your way to this future vision and see if you make a change. Sometimes that can work. Sometimes it's also, you can do it more on the qualitative side of things and probe on that prototypically. So if you say, hey, like, does this solve the thing that you're trying to achieve? That's a good way to kind of prevent some of the risk of development time and do the exact same thing. But the point is correct. Is I think sometimes you just have to push people's thinking, and it gets gray between, is my judgment right and it's going to be wrong a lot, or is it not? But I think here's a couple of solutions we should try.
Awesome. And what advice would you have for PMs who want to pivot from a B2b space and want to build a career in B2c product management?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to it, where I think there are gaps in kind of the experience level in the past. So, so first off there's two sides to this. One side is, what are the things that you should probably brush up on a little bit just to make sure you're there? And then the other side is how you present yourself to prospective employers. So for the brush up side, like, I think it's I don't think I've met very many B2B people who have had the experience of literally tracking every single interaction on a customer has taken in their journey. They probably focused in really narrowly on a couple of scoped spots, which is relevant. But I think really understanding how analytics packages work, being able to understand all the different techniques to measure things is super critical. I think on the UX side, focus on building your skill set and your core and UX side. And so that's what I said before, apply that critical eye to everything you do. Talk to all of your B2C friends and so on, and just think about different ways you could tackle those problems, and use yourself as a user segment. That's not a terrible way to go. Like, how would I want to interact with this thing? Start there and then think about other people. And then the last one I think that's critical to brush up on is like the SEO acquisition stuff that I talked about. You're going to find that SEO is ingrained in literally everything you do, unless you're on a full-on banking platform's private platform where the acquisition is done elsewhere. I would say at least half of the PM jobs are all going to be tied into acquisition pieces. And so just read what's out there about the periodic table of SEO, about what are the most recent advancements to algorithms. You can learn a lot from Google on themselves. They talk pretty openly about it pieces in a vague way, but like you can kind of get there. So that's kind of where I would spend time brushing up while you're trying to get there. And then when you're presenting yourself, keep those same three things in mind. And how are you presenting it in your resume? So I said at the start, in PMs and B2b and B2c are generally all pretty good about communications and project management and all that stuff. So don't dwell on that in your application. If you've got 3 to 5 years of PM experience, it's an expectation. You can confirm you have it, but then focus more of your application on things like driving the analytical impact of your work. Showing numbers and quantification of things shows that you actually understand how to measure things and test things. You can talk about customer satisfaction and UX changes, those things. To the extent that you can bring those to the forefront, it'll probably help you with at least getting in the door. And then from there, sometimes you just need people to give you a shot on things. I've had a few in my career. So.
That's great. And like my 2 cents on practicing and learning. So about SEO, Moz has this great resource where it's like an SEO 101. It's a free resource which you can get access to. So it's called I think the Introduction to SEO. Yeah. And it's split into different chapters. And about analytics, I think you talked about a lot of tools around analytics. So to start off, Google Analytics has this course where they give you access to a real Google Analytics account and you can play around with it. So that's something to, that's a great, resource to start off with.
Yeah, the other thing that's out there in lots of cases, you can build your own site, right? Even if it gets no
Absolutely,
traffic,
absolutely.
it's easier than ever to build your own site, plug in analytics, and do some hacking around and see what happens.
Yep. Create your own goals. Measure your own goals. Awesome. Another question from the audience. What role has mentorship played in your career as you have honed your skill set towards becoming a product leader?
Yeah, it's a pretty mentorship to me is it's a pretty important thing. I think from my standpoint, I've always sought out mentorship opportunities throughout my career. You know, that comes in a variety of ways, right? So obviously at this point in my career, coaching and mentorship is a key part of the role, and it happens naturally. But along the way, I think don't underestimate the opportunities you get as a product manager, even without direct reporting relationships. You can find ways to give people support, even in those teams, even on a daily basis, that are not official mentorship capacities, that really help people develop. And so there was I have a particular success story in mind. There was a woman that I worked with in the UK who was a brand new junior developer straight out of university, probably not as confident in her skill set as she should have been, because she was a pretty strong developer. And just at the time, she didn't report to me. She wasn't like a direct report. She was just on my Scrum team. And so, look, I think there were a lot of ways I engaged with her, both by thinking about making sure she got pieces of work that she could take on and accomplish successfully, and guiding the technical lead on that team for those same things, through to like just spending some more one-on-one time with her, talking about context, and even just like, and eventually sometimes it's just a confidence thing that you need to build with people. Sometimes it's a competence thing, and that's a very different approach. But in this particular case, this developer, after 3 months, was the employee of the month for the work she was delivering. And it's just, I think sometimes you can find those opportunities to work with people and even give them little nudges along the way that are equally as valuable as you going out and spending time with someone in a mentorship chat in the community. But I think there's different parts of the coaching and teaching side that you need to hone in different environments. So it's almost useful to kind of think about, what are the things that make a good leader, good coach? How do I tick those off within the different contexts that I get in my life? Those ones that I have to make with external people, and the ones that I have with the teams that I have accessible to me today, and then find those opportunities.
All right. And I have another question around, you building your own team at Ratehub. So what were some of the challenges of building those design, analytics, and product teams and getting everyone together?
Yeah, it's hard. I'm not gonna lie. My first year-ish was complicated and long and tiring. I think one of the things that happens when you're building a lot of these product functions into businesses, traditionally product is not built at the start, and so what you're actually doing is you're ingraining change management into a business at the same time as you're trying to build and hire and onboard people. And so even down to like, how do we operate on a day-to-day basis? What tooling do we use? All that stuff is new to everyone, and everyone's got an opinion, especially because it's not established. And so I think some of the biggest challenges I faced were just obvious challenges. Like, it just takes a lot of time to hire people, and it takes a lot of time to onboard people, and doing a lot of them at the same time. But then layer in, you're probably doing the job yourself at the same time. So, think about operating as a PM full-time, and then like building a team and processes and stuff around you. It can get quite complicated quickly, and take up a lot of hours and time. There's a lot of, as with any sort of change management process, people need to eat their broccoli 7 times before they like it. So you kind of need to do it a lot of times before it gets a little smoother. And then once people buy into that concept, then storming, norming, forming concept takes a while for the team to get up to normal, right? So I think that's true in any sort of functional piece, but there's additional challenges getting the buy-in aspect of things when you're not just scaling a team, but actually getting people to understand the value of your investments. So to be fair, I think our team has really been incredibly supportive as we've gotten there. It just takes time and effort. And I feel pretty proud about the work and the team that we've got in place at the moment.
Great. And we have a question from a viewer on YouTube. PM's trying to pivot from B2b to B2c.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about, how they can gain experience in user research, analytics, acquisition. But during this journey, what could be their greatest roadblock and how can they overcome that?
Okay, so the roadblocks in the transition, I mean, I think it's very easy to go off course whenever you're self-training, right, on this stuff. So I think some of the principles I talked about earlier, reality check often, time box often, are super useful. And so it's like, how do you find ways to take that theory and then put it into practice, even if you don't effectively do it, to see if it works? And so what I mean by that, it could be you've got your site, you learn something about keyword targeting on SEO, and you try to target a couple of keywords on your site to see if they make a difference. That's one way to do it. If you're, you put it out there and you see if there's actually a shift in volume of traffic coming for those keywords very quickly. Another way to do it is sort of like read a chapter, for lack of a better term, and then talk to your expert friends quickly and just say, this is what I learned from this. Is this what you understand? And, pick the brains of the people that are a bit more the expertise on this. Both are pretty good ways, but the key in anything is time boxing and understanding how to validate that what you've learned is true. And I apply that not just in my product career, but almost everything I'm thinking about this way.
Oh, we have another question coming up. All right. So unlike some of the other career streams like marketing manager, data analytics, there currently don't exist many schools that claim to train students towards becoming good product managers and then feed them to the tech startups. What are some of the qualities you look when interviewing aspiring PMs who offer passion for the job but do not have a lot of relevant experience to offer?
Is somebody interested in applying? Is that what I'm hearing here? I'm just kidding. No, I think, yeah, it's a great question. As I alluded to before, this is very much still an apprenticeship role in the world, and it's changing slowly because we are starting to see the product faculty academy things like Mo has done a bunch of stuff with this. There's quite a few, even in undergrad degrees, we see courses that are helpful, right? Like some of the agile courses are trainable in certain degree programs, but that doesn't solve for all the other aspects of product management. There's not like one formal degree. So I think, so the question was very much like, what are the qualities I look for? So generally, I tend to look for people, number one, in any role or capacity. I'm massively driven by intellectual curiosity and clear motivation for things. I think those supersedes skills in proven skills in a lot of cases. You can't just get a smart, like curious, motivated person to do product roles straight away necessarily. So there's other skill sets you need to look for. But in the past, I've hired people who have had no product experience, but like good depth of stakeholder management and project management is a foundational piece, as I said before. An aptitude for math and like the sciencey stuff is pretty important. Clear knowledge or shown empathy in a lot of ways, right? And creativity on those aspects, because every problem can be solved a million different ways. And so it tends to be a combination of having the right drive and determination to solve these things, blended with a little bit of proof around some of those harder skills, even if they're not directly in a product environment. You can teach, if you have a curious and motivated person, you can teach them the science of A/B testing. You can teach them how analytics works, even if they don't have a technical background. Someone can get to that over time. It just takes longer. So I think the key is, if you can have the virtue of finding that unicorn that has it all, great. Otherwise, look to test for those different pieces. And so all of my interview questions tend to be tailored to solving for a bunch of those different points in different ways.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott, for giving all those insight, and thanks for being on Product AMA. It really means a lot, and we really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure hosting you. Everyone, take care, stay safe, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for hosting me.
Follow Product AMA on Twitter and send us your topic suggestions. We look forward to seeing you soon.